Special Operations, Covert Ops, Espionage, The Team House, with your hosts, Jack Murphy and David Park.
Hey folks, welcome to episode 274 of The Team House. I'm Jack Murphy. Dave's out tonight. Dee's back there producing. Our guest on tonight's show is Eric Velez. He served as a career FBI agent, including 2 stints as assistant directors. And we're really excited to talk about his whole career, a lot of interesting stuff, kidnapping cases, counter-drug stuff, and then intelligence. So we'll get into all of that. I just want to give a quick shout out to Casa Carabeo Cigars for providing the cigars for this show. You can find them at casacarabeo.com. And please also check out our Patreon. There's a link down in the description. If you sign up for $5 a month, you get access to all the episodes of The Team House ad-free, and we really appreciate you guys supporting the channel. So, with that said, Eric, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank
Cheers.
you for having me. Cheers.
Thank you for coming in.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah, thank you for having me.
I mean, it's our pleasure. Yeah. So, I'll ask you to start at the beginning with, kind of your origin story. Like, how did you grow up and what was like that pathway that took you towards the FBI?
Yeah, sure. Actually, it's an interesting story. It's kind of like my bureau story is a real true mailroom to boardroom type of story. So I grew up in Puerto Rico. My dad was the Army, so I'm an Army brat, born in Fort Gordon, Georgia. But Puerto Rico is where I call home. And back when I was coming out of high school, it was right around that time where there was a group called the Machetero Group, an independence movement terrorist organization in Puerto Rico. And my dad had gotten a job post-Army working in the FBI as an IA. It's not an intel analyst. These are folks, investigative assistants, and so the agents working their cases. These are the folks that would do a lot of the DMV runs, some of the background stuff to kind of help the agents along their cases. In 85, I believe it was 84 is when it happens, the organization shoots a law rocket into the FBI office in San Juan. And it hits right above, the office is on the 5th floor, it hits on the 6th floor. But at the time they said, hey, let's beef up the night crew. So there was one guy that did midnight to 8, another guy that did 4 to midnight, there was a swing shift guy. And so they wanted to put somebody else on quickly. So here I am, I'm 18 years old, I have no credit, hadn't worked anywhere, so my background took like nothing to get in. And so my first job is working the night shift in Puerto Rico and picking up confidential trash, doing radio, doing mail deliveries. And that's how I get started into the FBI. And then from there, at that point, I was studying airway science. I wanted to be something to do with aviation, air traffic controller, I went maybe pilot. But then my first exposure to FBI agents, I remember sitting there, I was just a kid, and there had been this raid earlier on. They'd taken down this big gang, and some SWAT guys had come up with this guy. This one guy was all tatted up and was a bad guy. And I'm sitting there in my desk, and there's a chair, and they said, hey, we're gonna put him right here. And they sat the guy next to me, and they had these two big old SWAT guys, all jacked up. And at that moment, I went like, I want to be that. Like, that's what I want to do. And so I change, and I start to everything I'm studying in school changes, and I become an agent in 92. So I have 7 years clerical, what they called, I was a clerk back then. And then I become an agent in 92.
So, I mean, that's an interesting way to kind of, like you said, graduate up into the organization.
Yeah.
Is that that's like atypical. Usually it's like college or law enforcement into FBI, right?
Correct. Yeah, it's not, there are folks that start off in the bureau kind of either as analysts or others, and then they become agents later on. Yeah. It's usually, an agent position is usually a second or third career. It's not like your first thing you're doing. So a lot of them have a background there. The military, law enforcement, something, accounting, lawyers, and then they become agents, where mine was, my whole thing was, I'd started from the organization. I was a GS3. So I was making $11,000 a year. I mean, it's like, back then, for me, I'm 18 years old, 19 years old, and I'm making $11,000. That was a lot of money for me. So, but yeah, it's not typical. My path is not, at least back then it wasn't.
So, 1992, you go to Quantico.
Yeah.
What's it like going through the training to be a special agent at that time?
Man, I tell you, I remember somebody once told me this, and it was the best way to describe Quantico. It was like, it's the best time of my life, but I never want to do it again. So it's every day. I was there 16 weeks. I think they've upped it to, I'm not sure exactly how long it is now, but back then it was 16 weeks. And every day it's like, you're going to do this. You're going to take this test. You're going to do this, whatever. You're going to shoot this many times. And you just get by day. And at the end of the day, you're exhausted and you just go day 2. And before you know it, you're graduating. They're giving you a gun and a badge and they're sending you out. But it's not easy. It's not meant to be easy. But it's like I said, best thing I ever did. Never would do it again. Yeah.
At the time in 1992, I mean, what's kind of like the culture of the FBI? Like, what is it that they're training you to do? I mean, what is the main focus of the organization at that time?
Well, when I was coming in, it was around the time Janet Reno, the war on drugs, Southwest Border Initiative. And I remember, because I was in the FBI, a lot of the agents, would tell me, like, hey, you know where you're going, right? And I go, because you don't know where you're going. When you get to Quantico, you open up your letter at week 8 and they tell you where you're going to go. And they go, you're going to the border. Like, you're going to work dope in the border. And I go, how do you know that? He goes, anybody who speaks Spanish is going to go. And being Puerto Rican, I spoke Spanish. And sure enough, there were 4 of us in my class that spoke Spanish. 2 got McAllen and 2 got El Paso. So yeah, we were in that was the way it was back then.
So you graduate from Quantico, and that must have been a big moment for you.
Huge.
Yeah.
Best shape of my life. Just exciting to go to Texas, to McAllen, to actually work drug cases, and it was hit the ground running. I mean, you got there. I remember the day I got to McAllen, I get called like, hey, tomorrow morning, 4:00, we got an arrest. It was like that. McAllen was a very busy office back then, not just drugs, but fugitives, folks that are coming and hiding back in the valley. And so it was a nonstop. And for an agent, it's the best time of your life, because you're arresting, you're involved in a lot of, and we were teamed up with our partners at DEA and Customs at the time, and others, IRS, others that worked there. But DEA and us and Customs, we were all parts of task forces, and all the guys, we all knew each other. It was really cool. It was nice being part of that community. Yeah.
And you mentioned a little bit of it. I mean, that Janet Reno was really escalating the pressure on the flow of drugs coming across the border. Could you expand on kind of like what you were seeing, what was going on at that time?
Well, it's interesting because we had Title 21 authority, which allowed the Bureau to work drug cases, much like DEA. So the approach that the Bureau was taking was that we focused on the large cartels, whether they're Carrillo Fuentes, what's the other, the different, Caro Quintero,
Sinaloa,
Juan Garcia Abrego, Garcia Abrego ran the Gulf cartel. So McAllen, that's what. So for us, we had a squad, and a typical squad is usually, anywhere 10, 12, 15 agents. We had about 18 agents on our squad, and the way we did it in McAllen was there was one case, maybe 2 cases, but you had to link the case to a cartel. If you could not establish that link, you could not work it.
It wasn't an FBI case.
Yeah, I mean, you only had so many resources, and so the case agent basically ran the case, and then the rest of us supported it. We did surveillance, we sat on wiretaps, we did whatever. But that's how it was, and that's my first activity as an agent was sitting on wiretaps, bouncing around, supporting cases. And I said, I'm going to end up doing this for the rest of my life unless I become the case agent,
You told me earlier on that it was kind of funny listening to the wires because you speak Puerto Rican Spanish and these guys speak like Mexican prison Spanish.
Yeah. Well, I remember because they set me up. I was in McAllen. I just got my apartment, and then it was around Christmas time or Thanksgiving. It was the holiday, and they said, "Hey, you need to come up to San Antonio." It was a wire. We're working a Mexican mafia wire, and the main subject, I believe, was in California. But there's the leadership of the Mexican mafia was in San Antonio. We were up on these wiretaps, and I show up, and it's me. I think I have the 4 to midnight, and it's me and I think we were on 4 lines, so the other 3 were San Antonio PD guys. You know, they all grew up in that area, and they know the language. You know, and so I remember my first call comes in. You know, at the time we had cassette players, like you know, now it's all digital, but back then you had cassette players, and we had like three machines.
We have to explain all that to our younger audience.
Yeah. So we had like 3 machines, and then the machines, the original one, you take that one out, you seal it, that's evidence, don't mess with it. They put a 4th one for me. And that was because that first call, I remember it going off, and I put the headphones on, and they're like, oh, and it just goes on, and it ends. And I take that thing off, my headphones off, and I look around the room, and I said, I didn't understand a word these people just said. And I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. So they put another machine, then I could take it out, and in between calls, I could listen, and I would pick things up. Like, for example, like in Spanish, mueble, like, means furniture, you know. Mueble in them is a car, you know, and feria is, for us, is some fair, and for them it's money. And so they traes mueble, sí, que si la feria, and I'm like, something about furniture, and they're going to some fair, and these guys, San Antonio PD guys, just laugh, and they laugh and laugh. The only thing that made me feel good is that the opposite of thing, like when the Mexican-American agents, the agents that were from Texas or whatever, that kind of grew up with that language, Spanish kind of, when they got sent to Puerto Rico, and they sat on Puerto Rican wires, and they had to listen to like where I came from talk, they say that is impossible. So I at least I picked up the language, but it wasn't easy at all. It was very challenging at first.
So how did you make that jump then from, you know, you said you didn't want to spend your whole career sitting on wires.
Yeah.
How did you make that jump to, you know, working cases?
Yeah, well, I mean, like I figured out real quick. I said, okay, so I've got to open up, I got to start a case, and I have to tie it to a large cartel, one of the top organizations, and at the time I was stationed in McAllen, but we had Hidalgo County, and then there was Starr County, which is just west of, and a lot of dope was coming up through Starr County, through Rio Grande City, Roma, Texas, and I said, you know, I was single, so I figured like, you know, it's like a 45-minute drive or something, and there's enough work in McAllen. You could stay in McAllen, but I was going to go out to the Wild West, and I was gonna go find the big case. And I remember I teamed up with a Border Patrol agent, Juan Garcia is his name, Juanito we called him, and he took me under his wing. And you know, I said, hey, listen, I want to make a case. Like I'm tired of sitting on these wires. I want my own case. And he says, okay. And I said, well, who's the biggest, baddest guy here? Who's the one everybody wants? And at the time, there was a guy named La Bruja, the witch, and he says La Bruja is the guy that runs here, and he's tied to Garcia Abrego and this and that, whatever. And he taught me how to become a good agent. Like, and I stayed with him, and sure enough. In fact, I'll talk a little bit when I talk about my intel career, but he taught me the value of intelligence, like how intelligence drives investigations. Like, for example, Juanito, like being Border Patrol, they could come in, I believe it's 25 miles from the border. They can get into the ranches, you know, and do what they have to do for obvious reasons. And whenever there was a big load that had crossed, the organizations would celebrate it by having a pachanga. Pachanga is kind of like a barbecue. You know, they do fajitas, beer, and they're celebrating. So Juanito had this really smart idea that, you know, when he saw pachangas happening in ranches, you know, he'd just write down the license plate numbers of the cars, the trucks that were at the pachangas. And so he had a whole list. And so when you're working your cases and you knew DEA had taken down this load, or there was a load that was crossed and you're sharing back and forth, then he could piece together, like, this guy has been at a pachanga every time this organization, right. And that's how he tied it all up. So that's the true meaning of collection, like intelligence collection, understanding like what your gaps are, and how he was smart and did that, and he taught me all those kind of things. And later on, I used those examples when we started talking about how the Bureau transformed into this kind of dual agency, you know, with the intel mission as well. But yeah, that's how I got in, and sure enough, we got up on one wiretap. We ended up spinning off on 3 more, 4 more. We ended up taking down that entire organization, disrupting that entire organization.
Was that River Witch?
River Witch, yeah. River Witch was a code name we gave it just because La Bruja, which means the witch, and the Rio Grande Valley and the river. So River Witch was Operation River Witch was the one that was my first big case.
So how did that investigation progress as you get warrants for these wiretaps and start developing the case?
Yeah, you basically, you try to get up on a phone, through the court order, of one of these leaders of this organization, and hopefully, because it's hard to penetrate those organizations through regular human sources. They're very close-knit, they're very tight-hold. Everybody knows everybody, like the cars you drive, the minute you're driving in there, they know you're not from here. So getting somebody in is hard. So you have to be smart enough to understand like how they're communicating and what phones they're using, and then developing the probable cause to actually be able to intercept that phone with a court, go to a judge with an affidavit and get that done. But once you're on the right phone, you're picking up a lot. And they all talked in code, like each of them had numbers and areas. I remember one time there was we were on this, and I would go, and every day I would look at the pen registers and see like what numbers. I knew all the numbers. I had memorized every single number. And I saw one number, I was like, wait a minute, this one I don't know. And sure enough, that led me to a house, and then little by little we started developing some probable cause. But there was one of the interesting things about that case was there was always this rumor that there was somebody that was at the with the customs at the time, that an immigration, I'm sorry, that was allowing the loads to come in. And they knew who she was, but she was very smart about it. And I remember one time I go in and it's like, I said, hey, anything, I asked the translators, like anything relevant? And I'd look at the stack of notes, summaries. And I saw one, it said, hey, va a pasar, va a pasar. And it was like, it's going to happen. And it goes, sí, a la una, donde comemos pescado, like where we eat fish. And I knew that there was a port of entry near Falcon Lake, and there was a place where you could eat fish. There was like a restaurant there, and I went, wow, I wonder if something's going to happen at 1 o'clock at that port of entry. And so I had been working with the immigration folks, and I said, hey, listen, what is her schedule? She goes, well, she was supposed to be in Rio Grande City, but she asked to work Roma at 1 o'clock. She takes a 1 o'clock shift. And I told my boss, it's happening. He's like, what do you mean? I go, it's happening. Like, they're going to cross, and she's going to be there. Are you sure? And I said, I know it. I just know it. I mean, I've been working this case long enough. Something's going to happen. So we had everybody out there. We had a really cool setup with DPS, and sure enough, man, I remember she requests to kind of start at 2 o'clock, or she changes her time. And I went, oh man, now I got everybody out there. They'll be like, what's Eric up to? And then sure enough, a call comes in, and goes like, hey, a las dos, like they changed the time too. And I knew then. Sure enough, I remember we had people kind of inside the customs or the immigration office that has an eye view of what's going on there as the lanes would come in. And like clockwork, man. The first car comes in. The first car, she enters the tag, and we could see that she enters the tag, and it's the right tag. And we say, don't follow that one. Let that one go. Then here comes a Crown Vic. Those Crown Victorias, they can hold like 500 pounds of weed in the trunk. And the Crown Vic comes, and she makes a gesture like she's entering something. But the guy in our task force, our customs guy, he said, she didn't enter anything. And we knew that one. That one comes in, and then 2 more Crown Vics come right, boom, boom, right back there. And we were like, okay, so everybody hold tight, hold tight. But then DPS, they're fantastic. They did the traffic stop, but these guys ran. And all 3 of them took off and jumped, and a couple of them jumped in the river and went back south. But we ended up taking down 1,500 pounds of weed that day. That 500 pounds in each trunk. And then the wire went crazy. That's when it gets really good. What happened?
Yeah, they're all like pointing fingers.
They're all pointing fingers. Who the fuck? What happened? So, and then the case just goes on. It was that was That was the most fun I ever had.
And you busted a corrupt immigration officer.
Yep. Because she ended up getting prison time, obviously, for that. But that's how you had to put the work in. Like you had to really understand what normal looked like, and then what is out of place. And that one call was out of place. That one call was like, who is this person? Turns out the call that he made was a fugitive that was up north. It had come in and was living in McAllen, and that person had made the call. And so that's all it took, was that one break, and then we were able to take down this. But it's a lot of fun. I mean, it shows really kind of how agencies working together, because we had IRS, DEA, Customs, FBI. We were in an OCDF task force. It was just the best time.
I mean, that was obviously a huge event, but you mentioned that the wire goes crazy. Was there like a kind of culmination of this case? I mean,
It culminates. We take down the whole organization. Everybody, you want to take the time to identify who all these players are. You don't want to take it down too soon. But sometimes on these wires, it gets risky because you don't want to heat it up. So like you're taking down a load. You don't want to let the dope walk. So you got to have creative ways of, like we would
random
like
stop
Falfurrius, Texas was the checkpoint. So we let them know, like, hey, listen, this is coming up, and then they do a search, and then the wire go out. What's going on? It's like, how it starts to get to the point where you can't do that too often.
Right, because they know
it's going to start heating up. And so we calculated the time. I had been transferred to Puerto Rico right before the takedown, and another case agent had taken it up after I'd left. But yeah, that was
one of the best. Do you remember how many people they ended up?
I don't remember. Dozens, I know.
Yeah.
At least.
And which organization was this?
It was the guy that was running the show was named Hector Martinez, but he was tied to the Juan Garcia Abrego organization with the Gulf Cartel. Some people might know that if you watch that show Narco. The one they do not in Colombia but the Mexican version. He shows, he's on that and so on. But that was that. I tell people, like my kids and stuff, like, if you watch that, that's what my life was like. That was it, because that was literally 1992-ish around there when I got to McAllen. So yeah, it was a lot of fun.
And then from there you get sent down to Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
Working, gang cases and public corruption.
Yeah.
Could you set the stage? I mean, especially because you're from Puerto Rico, could you set the stage a little bit for sort of the political, but also the criminality that you had to deal with?
Yeah. So Puerto Rico just opened up some, we call them resident agencies. They're like sub-offices, one in each side of the island, Ponce, Fajardo, then Aguadilla, where I was in the west part of the island. A lot of gang activity. There was something called the Safe Street Task Force. Again, everything's multi-agency with POPR, Police of Puerto Rico. And we had task force officers that were on our team, police officers that we had brought on our squad. There was a lot of that, a lot of public corruption work. Bribes, federal money going into Puerto Rico, and then people taking cuts of it and things like that. So it's like they say, the target-rich environment. There was never lack of work.
Was the Puerto Rican nationalist movement still kicking at this point?
It wasn't like it was when I was.
When you started?
Yeah. Not like when it was when I was in the 80s. There was a fugitive that everybody was trying to catch that was tied to the macheteros. They thought was around he was our AOR, but that was it. That was the extent of it. It was, I mean, there was work, but I was focused on, gangs and public corruption, stuff like that.
Any memorable cases that you worked on during that time down there?
There was a case. The biggest case that I worked when I was down there was a case that involved a corrupt mayor that was taking money, federal money that was coming in. He had an engineer that drew up plans, and this engineer basically would do the work, but he'd have to pay the mayor 30% of the work. And I remember when that case came in, my partner, may rest in peace, he passed away, but he and I were sitting in the office, and we got a call about, like, hey, listen, there's this guy, he has some information, about corruption going on, and it was late, we're like, yeah, really, does he really kind of thing? It's like, sure, we'll talk to him. Tell him to come over to our office. And we waited for him, and he showed up, and he was an engineer, and I remember he's telling me about the mayor, and I said, you know what? There's one way we can make sure this is true. And he says, how? I says, well, we'll go talk to him, but we're gonna wire you up, And so we got authority to do all of that and consent. And I remember because at the time, this is so now you like watch movies and you all this sophisticated technology.
But it was a cassette recorder,
dude. It was as big as that notepad. It seemed like, and it was about this big. And so we ended up going to a hotel room, and then I said, okay, drop your pants because we're gonna put it like here on your ankle. We're gonna run the wire up here, and we're gonna tape it up here. And the man is sweating. He is sweating. Like, you need to relax because you can't go in looking like this, He's like, do I have anything smaller? Like in the movies, everything's smaller. I go, no, this is it. But I said, nobody's there. He'll never suspect a thing. And sure enough, he goes in and he has a conversation with him. And he's like, you either give me the 30% or you're never going to work in this town again. It's perfect. And that led to just a long investigation where ultimately, on video, we're he's paying the money, and it was another huge takedown, another good case, and that was that's important to me because I love Puerto Rico. It's the island I grew up on, and the corruption that impacts
a lot of people.
Everything.
Yeah.
When you're having to take money that's meant to go to fix streets and schools and stuff like that, and then people are stealing it. So that gave me a lot of pleasure working that. Put those kind of guys away.
No, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And then you get sent to DEA SOD.
Yeah. So I become a supervisor. It's funny because people ask me, because I spend a lot of time in leadership roles in the bureau, and I would give leadership speeches and stuff like that. And sometimes people say like, were you inspired by some particular leader? It's like, what drove you to be kind of a leader in the FBI? And I tell them well, actually, what drove me was when I was I loved being a street agent. I just loved it. You work your cases, it's a lot of fun. And my time in management, I don't think I was ready for it. I still wanted to spend more time in the field, but I had just built a house, and it was in the beautiful home. It was on the cliff, right on the water, and I was building the house, and I'd gotten a loan at the bank, just like everything else. And hurricane, I think it was Hugo, comes by, mm-hmm. and it blows. The whole house is destroyed.
Oh, man.
So the whole top of the thing is gone. And so when I go to find the builder, I can't find the builder. The builder is gone. And it turns out the builder was involved in this kind of sort of a Ponzi scheme where he was using money from certain loans to right. fix other homes that were yelling at him. And so it turns out I don't have any money. The builder's gone, and I have to build the house myself. And I just literally would get up early in the morning, go to the concrete place. I'd hire people. It was a disaster. And I said, I'm going to go broke because I'm paying this. I can't afford this. So I did know that if I got a promotion, I could sell my house through the transfer program, the relocation program. And so I said, okay, I'm gonna see if there's any jobs at headquarters, and then I'll get a promotion at headquarters. and then I did, and that's when I got my job. And then, sure enough, the reload company buys my house, and I'm able to get out from under. So it wasn't inspired through a book by Colin Powell or anything like that, or George Washington. It was I was broke, and if I did not sell this house. And so, but when I become in a leadership role, when I was at SOD, I didn't really manage people. I was more part of Special Operations Division, kind of helping manage investigations that were nationwide. But I really liked, when I became a supervisor, I liked working with the teams. I like being part of that, and that's when I stayed on. But the kind of the trajectory into leadership roles in the FBI. But it really was more than trying to get from under from a loan.
Yeah, not a very glamorous story, like you said. Not inspired by a JFK speech, but it's still a reason. It got you somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it's a hell of a motivator when something like that happens. Could you tell a little bit more about what SOD was? Because I've heard of them before, but
Yeah.
I don't really know too much myself.
You know, I don't. A lot of people don't talk about it. In fact, I don't know how much I can say about it. I will just say it's a multi-agency organization. DEA runs it. They bring in partner agencies, and they're focused on helping to coordinate large-scale investigations that are across the country. You know, I mean, the types of investigations they're coordinating, you know, have subjects that are in all like maybe 10 different states. And so what we call ourselves staff coordinators, and we basically, you know, help provide resources, financial resources to these major operations.
These are like huge drug trafficking rings.
They're all drug trafficking cases, big drug trafficking cases, and yeah. And so what I would do is I would support certain offices. My region was the Texas area, and so whether it was San Antonio, Dallas, Houston, El Paso, and I would work with the case agents of those big cases and help them any way I could, you know, with resources and things like that. So, but yeah, it was a lot of fun. Again, I'd worked with DEA my whole career, so it was kind of neat being able to work with them there.
And then let's talk a little bit about, you know, kind of like around this time frame, 9/11 happens.
Yeah.
If you could tell us a little bit about where you were and
Yeah.
what your job was, you know, and leading into the next thing you got pulled into.
Well, so 9/11, the actual date of 9/11, I was in Puerto Rico. I was there doing a training. I was part of DEA's SOD, but I was supporting. I was in a training team going to San Juan. I remember the secretary kind of telling me like, "Hey, there's a plane flew into the World Trade Center," and I went over to the TV and I saw kind of what's now everybody knows, the first tower, and then the second tower hits, and it's like, because we thought like somebody just accidentally took a small plane, we don't know what's going on. The special agent in charge of the San Juan office basically designates us, this team of people from headquarters, like we're part of the San Juan Field Office at this point. And so all hands on deck. And we wanted to get back home because, like my wife and kids, I was worried because I didn't know exactly what was going on, but I did know that our house, we lived over near Oakton, where the planes would fly over our house all the time, and I'm thinking, if they shoot that plane down, like all this stuff's going through your head, you don't know.
Right.
But there was no flights leaving. And one of the most eerie things I remember was when the first United Airlines flight that left San Juan to go back to Dulles, they let us get on that plane. And so we blue lighted it all the way to the airport, and the agents that were on our training team got on that first United Airlines flight back to San Juan. And back to Dulles. The flight attendants on that plane were friends of many of the flight attendants that passed away, because one of the flights originated from Dulles. And so they were going back home, and they would come up to us crying, just thanking us for being there. They were very scared, as you would imagine. And then when we get to Dulles and we land, I don't know if you've ever been to Dulles Airport, I'm sure you have.
Yeah.
There was nobody. It was completely empty. It was the most eerie feeling. And the next day we all were to report to headquarters to the SIOC, which was it's like, think of it as like a big command post there in the building. And there was a line of people at the SIOC, the entrance of SIOC. SIOC's designed to be a command post where you have large scale investigation to be coordinated. And one hijacking would have had that place going crazy. Just filled to the top, right? There were 4 hijackings here. And so I remember lining up, we were all lined up, and then I got to the front of the room and I said, Eric Velez, SOD, Criminal Division, and he says, okay. And it was pretty chaotic. He goes, go to room E2. I forget what the name of the room was. And he's like, and I said, okay. So I walk right through the center of SIOC, and it is like controlled chaos is probably the way to describe it. Just like there's a lot of movement. Everybody's just talking. And I find room E2, and there's another guy sitting at the table, and I go, Eric Velez, they told me to come here. And he goes, okay, you see that box, all those boxes along the wall? And there was a lot of boxes up along the wall. And I go, yeah. He goes, well, those are all letters that people have written to Director Mueller. You need to open them, read them, and see if there's anything of value, tip value in them. You know, somebody could have written and said, you know, hey, my neighbor, whatever. So I start to open letter by letter. And one of the most interesting things, like the most patriotic letters you'd ever read. Like there were people, I remember one was like, you know, dear Mr. Director, they all started like that. It's like, you know, I'm a former Marine. I still wear size 32. Put me in. You know, you don't have to pay me. Everybody was coming together. Everybody wanted to be part of this. And I always wondered, like, whatever happened to all those letters, because I thought, like, it'd be great to kind of put a book together called Dear Mr. Director and kind of show, because I think, like, the further we get away from that, I mean, there's people that are now police officers and government and law enforcement and serving the country that weren't even alive when that happened.
Oh, yeah.
But the further we get away, it's easy to forget, like, how we came together as a country and how we united. You know, I remember how hard it was to buy an American flag because they were all out of stock. They were all over the bridges and American flags everywhere. It was crazy because, like, I'd come into the SOC and I work a night shift and there would be like boxes of Skittles or boxes of Frito-Lay potato chips or something that people were, you know, donating so that because we were working around the clock nonstop. It's crazy how we all came together. And but yeah, that changes because now I get an assignment right around then. I get assigned to the LA where I'm working the drug squad, a supervisor in Santa Ana and Orange County. But that doesn't last very long. I become a JTTF, a Joint Terrorism Task Force supervisor. So my career transitions from criminal work to national security work.
Before we get into that, I think in not long after 9/11, I guess in 2002, there's a kidnapping case.
Yes.
You tell us a little bit about how your involvement in that, how that came about.
Yeah, that's one of the hardest cases I ever was involved in. I mean, when you work in these RAs, these resident agencies, these smaller offices, you tend to work a lot of different types of cases. Even though you may be assigned to one squad, that like my squad that worked drugs, or then became a terrorism task force. If the violent crime squad that had kidnappings, if there was ever a child kidnapping, it was all hands on deck for that. We all worked it, and this was a case that involved a little girl. I think she was 6 years old, named Samantha Runyon. A lot of your listeners and viewers may remember that, especially people from that area. A little girl that got kidnapped right from her front porch. And my job was, okay, Eric, you head over to the command post, which was over by Orange County Sheriff's that had set up something near where the little girl lived. And I never wanted to work crimes against children cases. Like at the time, my daughter was 6 years old, looked a lot like her, you know, and I mean, God bless all those agents and officers and law enforcement that work those cases, but it's hard to kind of see that kind of stuff. And so my job was we were going to interview every single person that lived anywhere near that place. And we had hundreds of agents that had been deployed from Los Angeles down to Orange County, and I was keeping track of, okay, you hit this apartment complex, you this apartment complex, and we're tracking all the leads. So I didn't have to kind of look at any of the images or anything like this, but I remember I was sitting there and there was a guy from behavioral analysis unit from Quantico had come in, and he asked me, he says, do you think this was post-mortem? And he shows me the picture of her. Messed me up. That messed me up. Like, I remember how hard that was, you know, because of my daughter, and I remember that affecting me in ways I never thought it would affect me. Even as much, and I talk about mental health a lot because a lot of folks are like, especially guys, like, you know, I'm not gonna, I can tough it out, but that messed me up, and I definitely had to need to get some help and to talk through that because it was tough. It was tough to see that. That's
what messes up, you know, what, and I mean, it's perfectly natural. It bothers a lot of guys, a lot of the soldiers we have on here, people who have PTSD. A lot of it is from kids on the battlefield. It's from exactly that.
It's hard because, I mean, sometimes, you know, you think, you know, like, I don't want to seek any help or talk to anybody about it, and you internalize it. Eventually it's going to come out.
Yeah.
You're going to deal with it some way, whether it's through addictions or through some sort of thing. You're going to it's going to be hard for you. And it caught up to me later in life, because I held all that stuff in. I do a lot around that area, like helping people in that area, just to talk about PTSD and things like that, and share my story with them, it helps to open up.
Did you guys run that killer down?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he got the death sentence. Yeah, it's tragic. Tragic.
Jesus Christ.
Tragic.
Well, but I mean, like you said, thank God that, you were one of them, but all of these guys who work cases like that.
Oh, my God.
As you point out, it takes a real toll on the cops. I remember years ago, I went to a conference for police officers and prosecutors who work counter human trafficking cases.
Yeah.
I remember talking to one of the police officers, and he said something that was like so banal, but so striking when you picture his life.
Yeah.
He was there at this conference down in Tampa, and he's like, I was just standing out on the beach today, looking out over the ocean, and I thought, damn, it feels good to not have to look at kiddie porn today.
I know.
It's like, imagine what that guy's life is like and what he's going through.
Yeah.
And pour one out for these dudes,
Yeah.
and women who do that job.
Yeah.
They're really important people.
Yeah, especially the women. A lot of the agents were female agents that worked those cases, and they have kids of their own, they have families of their own, and yet they were much stronger than me. So that was the only time I really had to work anything like that. Terrorism kept me busy.
And so you were a drug supervisor out in the LA office, and then that transferred over into the Joint Terrorism Task Force, the JTTF. For folks out there who don't understand that, can you explain what the JTTF is, why that was created?
Yeah. So it was created, post 9/11 in order to form task forces in which you could bring in your state, local partners, other federal agencies. They all have their specialties, and they all have different things they bring to the fight. And so the JTTF is basically that. And each office had a JTTF, and some have multiple JTTFs, task forces. And LA, being as big as it was, they had started one in Orange County. Obviously the population of Orange County, and there was a lot going on. And it was done in conjunction with the Orange County Sheriff's Department. I remember my boss calling me in and telling me one day, hey, listen, starting Monday, your squad is no longer going to be a drug squad. Your squad's going to be a terrorism squad.
Wow.
And I was like, terrorism? I was like, I don't know how to work terrorism. It's like, and he says, but you know how to work task forces. And that was the difference, because what happens after 9/11, everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people transition from criminal work into counterterrorism work. And one of the things that happened because of that is the way we worked criminal cases. We worked always with partners. So, first thing I was saying, well, who's our CIA person? Who are our partners? Bring them in. Let's leverage everybody's expertise, because that's how we did it on the criminal side. And so that whole JTTF concept was all around that, and it was a lot of the criminal guys that came in that brought that type of work experience to the table. So to me, it was more about learning kind of the different rules of national security and the guidelines that govern how you do national security investigations versus how you do criminal investigations. Just had to learn.
Do you
all
want
that
to talk
stuff.
a little bit about, also, since we're going down this road in this topic, the differences between the two? Because in a counterterrorism investigation, I imagine you guys are doing a lot of surveillance, a lot of watching.
Yeah.
When a lot of FBI guys want to make arrests, they want to work those cases and
Yeah.
put someone in handcuffs, right?
Yeah, it's funny because, don't get me wrong, an FBI agent is going to do whatever they need you to do. If you're assigned to work counter intel, counterterrorism, cyber, whatever, you're doing it. Most of us, I guess I'll say that, at least when I was coming, wanted to catch bad guys.
Right. Catch bank robbers.
Bank robbers, be FBI agents, put the cuffs on the bad guys, put them in jail. There's this kind of instant gratification you get from your work. You're like, and so you're working fugitives and you're doing a lot of that kind of stuff. But even going to case and trial and learning what it's like to go to court, and then you work some of these counterterrorism, these national security cases, and they don't always provide that kind of instant gratification.
Right.
You're working
Long-term.
long terms. A lot of stuff that you're doing is in support of other agencies and things like that. And so it became a bit of a challenge to try to kind of recruit people from the criminal squads to kind of come and fill the JTTF or the terrorism squads. But, like I said, you got to do what you got to do. But yeah, there's a difference working those kind of cases.
You spent some time out there in LA working both drugs and terrorism.
Yeah.
Could you describe from an FBI agent's perspective, what's the criminality scene like around Los Angeles? I mean, I imagine it's literally an underworld unto itself, right?
Oh yeah. Those offices in New York, LA, Washington Field Office, big office, Chicago, Miami. There's a lot of work. I think when I started in LA, we must have had, I think we had about at least 12, maybe 14 drug squads, like squads of agents that worked drug cases throughout our territory. And so you could focus either like on your AOR, or sometimes you focus on a particular organization. But yeah, when it came to crime, I mean, and I like that. I kind of like working in offices where
you're busy.
Yeah, you're busy. I remember when I got McAllen, Texas. When you're in Quantico, there's this whole process. On week number 8, after you pass your second legal exam, at that point they figure, okay, this guy's going to make it. You think you're taking your second PT exam and your second legal exam, and so they're comfortable enough now to give you your orders. So there's this whole kind of ceremonial thing where at the end of the day, it's usually a Friday. There's a big board of the U.S. down at the bottom, and you're all sitting like in this kind of like stadium-style seating in the classrooms, and our class counselor or whatever would pull an envelope out of a fishbowl kind of thingy, and then he'd read the name on the front, and then when they called your name, you'd come down and you'd open your letter and you'd tell your class where you're going. And Velez, I'm usually last, but in this case. The fishbowl thing, I think I was like the third or fourth person, And I remember when somebody got like, I don't know, Colorado Springs or something like that. I go, wow, that's nice, And I had, now I think you're allowed to list them all. You can, all 56 offices, you can put like number 1 to 56. Back when I went through, you could pick 3 offices that you want to go to. I wanted to go back to Puerto Rico, but they wouldn't let agents go back to Puerto Rico at that time. First office agents, I don't know, just figured, hey, I'm an agent, why can't I go back? But anyway, so I picked Miami, Atlanta, and Charlotte. Like I figured if I could get there, I can get like a quick flight to. And so when I opened my letter, it's like, you've been assigned to the San Antonio Division, McAllen Resident Agency. And like people are like, oh, you're gonna hate it, blah, 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 blah. Well, you had to go up and put a pin on the map. And I remember
this is really elaborate.
Yeah, you go and you put a little pin on the map, and I remember looking at the map and I go, okay, here's Texas. Like I had never lived anywhere like near Texas, but I was like, okay, here's Texas and here's San Antonio, somewhere in the middle in this area. So I'm looking at that, okay. So McAllen, I don't see anywhere, and they're like, lower, and I'm like, lower, and I'm like, lower. Like I got all the way to the bottom, and it was like, I was in Mexico. I think I went to Mexico and I kind of went back up, and it was like, boom, and I pinned it there, and I was like, wow. Like, because, some people were laughing, I don't know. And it's funny because there's another Puerto Rican guy who's like a brother to me named Eric, his name Eric as well. And he was in my class, and he says, oh man, you're screwed. And I go, hey, it can't be that bad, It's like, and so he goes, he gets his letter, and he opens up San Antonio Division, McAllen, RA. And so
you guys went
we
out there
both
together.
got McAllen.
That's
The
funny.
best thing that ever happened. I freaking love McAllen, Texas. And it's like the cases that we worked, and all the other people that got these little offices in these Colorado Springs, nothing against them, but like, hey, they were like, hey, can you help us on this case? There's 5 pounds coming up on a controlled delivery. 5 pounds, like, no, like 10,000 pounds maybe, that's the kind of stuff we were working.
Yeah.
So being assigned to offices like LA, McAllen, Texas, those were blessings for me. I got to work great cases, you know.
And one of those cases you mentioned to me was the JIS case.
Yeah, the JIS case was a terrorism case. That was after I got the JTTF job in L.A. Shortly, you know, this is 2002, I think. So think about it. So it's not far removed from 9/11. Yeah. You know, we're handling thousands and thousands of leads. You know, everything is run down, everything. No matter how crazy it sounds, somebody in a crystal ball saw something in LA. Who is it? Let's go figure out who it is. And it was nonstop. And so most of them, as you would imagine, all wash out. You know, look out, suspicious, but nothing. And I remember one time, in this case, JS case is probably one of the most significant terrorism cases in the country that's ever been worked in the U.S., and yet not a lot of people know about it.
I had never heard of it until you told me about it.
And it's because it's anchored by two huge events that occur in this 2-week period of time where we're working this case. Two major events, which I'll tell you, happened. I remember getting the call. My boss at the time, really good guy, Randy Parsons, he calls me, and I'm having dinner at the time with my wife and some friends who flew in from San Antonio. And he says, "Hey, Eric, can you step out?" And he goes, "Hey, this is a for reals." Like, and I go, "What?" I could tell by the tone of his voice that something was different about this particular case. And this case involved the Torrance Police Department. Some people may recognize it now when I get into it. The Torrance Police Department had been tracking down some Crips that were some guys that were robbing some gas stations. And during one of the gas station robberies, the guy drops a cell phone. The cell phone leads them to an apartment complex, and the apartment, they find all sorts of stuff. Al-Qaeda literature, a manual called the JIS manual that talks about how they, you know, and it was a radicalized person up in Folsom Prison that had radicalized these guys, or this particular guy, while he was in prison. And then when he got out of prison, he went on to build this organization and to conduct this terrorist attack.
And so these guys were originally just a street gang.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And then in prison,
one
of them was radicalized with Islamic extremism.
Yeah, so, right, there was somebody up in Folsom Prison that was radicalizing people that didn't have life sentences that were going to come back out. And so this particular guy, he was coming back out, and so he had a mission, and it was all described what he was going to do, how he was going to recruit people, how he was going to conduct the terrorists, how he was going to find his target, how he was going to conduct the attacks, and it was all written down. And it was like, wait a minute. Like, so they pick up the guy, so obviously they pick him up, and both of these guys are now, they are in custody at Torrance Police Department. So I go from Orange County up to Torrance, and I remember getting to the command post. I don't know what time it is. It's in the middle of the night, and there's a bunch of stuff, and we're kind of like, we're really starting to dig into this thing. And we're interviewing the two people in custody. And they're being interviewed at the time. And I remember sitting there, and I look up at the screen, and there's this, on the TV screen, it's like, you know, breaking news, and there's this red bus in London that's got the top blown off of it. So that's the day of the London attacks is the day that we are at the command post. So as you can imagine, the whole focus is on that. The bureau is focused on that. Like, everybody's doing everything they can to ensure that there's nothing else that's gonna, you know, what else can we do to help that case? So we're just plugging away. One of these guys says that there's 12 other members out there. There's 12 members and we said, what? Okay, so we had 2, and there's 12 unknowns, and they would give us a first name. They would give us like, one guy wasn't talking at all, who was radicalized by the first guy. The other guy was talking. He was talking about these 12 people. And coincidentally, the next morning we had a JTTF executive board meeting. This is where we brought the leadership of all the different organizations. And so I got in front of them all, and I said, hey, here's what's happening. And so every single person in that room, we divvied out kind of, you know, so LA Sheriff had surveillance, you know, LAPD did this particular leads, DEA was helping, NCIS was helping, everybody was helping, and we divvied out all the work, and we were tracking down these 12 people. We tracked all 12 of them down within a couple of days.
Wow.
All of them. I mean, because like DEA and LAPD had a task force where they knew they knew that city very, very well, and so they were able to like hit their sources and go. And so, but ultimately, we ended up taking down that organization with this too. So the first event is the London bombings. The day that Chief Bratton is up on the podium and he's announcing the indictments and the arrest of this organization who were targeting Jewish El Al airport, LAX, the El Al counter, and synagogue and some other targets.
Wow.
He announces this, and on the screen you see Bratton, and then on the bottom of the screen you see this big, huge hurricane, and that's the day Katrina hits. So Katrina's hitting as we're taking down the group. So now the whole focus is on Katrina, as you can imagine. So a lot of people don't even know that one of the biggest kind of cases of potential terrorist attack that was thwarted and that was worked in this how we all came together is kind of forgotten. But it was, I mean, I slept on the couch up in LA, like we whatever sleep you can get, like everybody was working around the clock for 2 weeks. It was fascinating to see how we all came together.
Yeah, I mean, it's also interesting that, given the time frame that these guys, they want to go after the Israeli national airlines.
Yeah.
It seems like there are so many, I mean, if they're Al-Qaeda, and bin Laden's big thing was, attack America, it's weird that they, instead of attacking America somewhere, they went straight towards
the Jewish community.
Yeah.
It had something to do with kind of their radicalized philosophy. The guy that was up in Folsom, his views, he was very, anti-Israel, and that's why they selected those targets. It was pretty scary because like who were these folks? When we found these 12 people, they had been approached by this guy. Like they said, oh yeah, he came up to me, wanted me part of this group. He gave me a manual. They have a JIS manual, and I read it, and I thought, like, I'm not doing this kind of stuff.
What the hell is JIS, by the way?
It's and you're gonna catch me here. It's like Jamal is something that was
Jama Islamiyah,
but not Jama Islamiyah. It was an acronym of the leader in Folsom had called this organization.
Okay. So it was something he created.
He came up with the name, and it was 3 words, J-I, and we just used that as the initials of it. But it was not Jamal Islam. It was a separate organization.
And so when you rolled up these 12 guys, I mean, how did you find them? I mean, was it like guy living with his mom?
We had little small leads. He frequents this place, like this. Right, and he's best friends with a guy in a wheelchair. I mean, stuff like that. And we're like, okay. And his name is, whatever, like Tom or something like that, And so, just good old fashioned police work. They'd go, some guy in the wheelchair, blah, 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 and then one by one, everybody, would.
And how did the prosecution go?
It went extremely well. Yeah, I think we never went to trial. I mean, they all pled out,
Okay.
And they all got their sentences. But
counterterrorism sentences.
That's the other
they weren't
thing.
Screwing around at that.
No. These were like material support cases.
Yeah.
These are like major counterterrorism charges. They all pled out, and they all got their sentences. And that's another reason a lot of people don't know about it, because they never went to trial, so they didn't get the that publicity. But it's a fascinating case, like how that thing developed, and it shows just how when we come together as partners. And
there was never at any time, I mean, I understand that this guy had like Al-Qaeda literature and admired that, had aspirations, but there was no overseas nexus for this particular group?
No.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, there wasn't an overseas connection for the group, other than the fact that the guy was inspired by some of the folks, but never was there any direct contact with somebody.
So as you go through this period of time, I mean, we get to about 2008. You're in. First let's talk about Terror Screening Center.
Yeah, yeah. So that's my first job in the senior executive service ranks, the SES ranks, and I was a deputy director there. They recently stood up, and that's the center. The multi-agency center, again, that handles kind of watch listing and the whole terrorist, terrorist watch list.
I imagine that was a huge headache.
It was really busy, Again, we were just standing it up, so we were building all the different protocols. But yeah, again, it's another multi-agency environment. I'm very comfortable in that space. Great people, and I did that for only a year. I mean, I was there for about a year when I got word about this position in Los Angeles as the head of intelligence for the special agent in charge of the intelligence branch in Los Angeles, and I was asked if that would be something I was interested in, and I love LA, so I was like, I'll go back to LA, but I was like, I don't know anything about this intelligence stuff, this is kind of after the 9/11 Commission and the Terrorism Reform Act that establishes, the National Security Branch of the FBI and all this other stuff. And so I was the first special agent in charge of intelligence in the field in Los Angeles.
Was that folded under like the Patriot Act, or was it a separate bill?
Yeah, it was the Terrorism Prevention Act of 2004.
Okay, after.
Yeah, after. But it establishes the role of the executive assistant director of the FBI's intelligence branch, and it sets up the mandate of the FBI's mission to also embrace the criminal work that we do, but also accept our role as part of the intelligence community, and how we operate in the domestic environment, and the different regulations and guidelines that guide all of that, but how we work with our partner agencies domestically. And so when I got that job, I knew nothing about intelligence as you would think of it from the IC, the intelligence community aspect.
Are we talking about running human intelligence networks?
Human intelligence. I mean, the bureau is human is kind of our bread and butter. It's obviously through court orders and authorizations we can collect different ways, but human is a huge part of it. That's what we do as agents. I remember somebody once said, like, and it's really interesting, like our role as agents is how we communicate, and we're able to get information from through building relationships and different things that we do. So it's interesting because when we move out kind of into this world of this kind of transformation that occurs, even the idea of transforming the FBI left some people with a little bit of a bitter feeling of, because I worked the FBI 33 years total. I was like just a kid when I started. I loved that organization, and the men and women of the FBI. I wish everybody could see the dedication of these folks have. They're regular they're regular Americans, and they wake up every day. I just love that organization. And so when you talked about the special agent rank, the 1811 rank, and now you're telling them that, we're transforming, they're like, wait a minute. And so I think my role, one of the things, because I kind of got tagged as kind of like the intel guy, I didn't start off, I told you about my career, I was like, I started off working drugs, violent crime, stuff like that. But when I got to the intelligence branch and that side of the house, I think the first thing that I was hit by was the fact that there was a translation problem. There was, like, anytime you're going to transform an organization, a big organization, like the FBI or any organization, it's commitment versus compliance. That's a huge thing for me. If you try to transform an organization through compliance, it's going to fail, because they're going to do things as long as you're watching them and you're like. On the other hand, if you spend the time talking to them, letting them understand so that they're committed to it as much as you are, they believe in it as much, then they'll do it when you're not looking, because they feel it's important. That's what they want to do. And I just felt like at that time, we were very compliance driven. Everybody knew they had to do X, Y, and Z, and they had to produce this and that, but nobody, even though we tried, it just had not been enough. And so I said, I'm going to go out to every field office and I'm going to talk to every agent ever, and I'm going to explain like what it is that we're doing, and showing them that what we're talking about is stuff that we have done our entire life. When I told you the story about Juanito, and I would use that story to explain to them, like, I had requirements, intel requirements. Where do they cross their dope? Who are they sending money to? Those are my requirements. So I would develop sources, and I would specifically go to collect that information.
Right.
All we were telling them now is that you have to understand, like when you're working your cases and you have certain authorities that you can operate under that allows you to kind of ask other questions that maybe our partners might be interested in. That's all we're asking. We're not asking you to stop doing this great work. And so by explaining to them and them realizing, it's almost like, well, why didn't you just say that in the first place?
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying that the FBI Directorate of Intelligence was like a clearinghouse of information, that everything would come into you guys and you disseminate it where it needs to go?
Not necessarily. The Directorate of Intelligence was basically it's a director that basically governed the way that we developed our analytic workforce. So it had oversight of workforce planning, development.
Formalized a lot of those things.
But we formalized a lot of that. Training, budgets. I mean, it's a headquarters entity. But our field offices are set up so that each office has its intelligence division within the field offices. They call them squads, branches, and so we have that throughout and all the DI just established policies and governance over that, and that's the difference. So I did it in the field from a field perspective, but also went back to headquarters and ran the program from the national level as well.
So I mean, during that time, can you say what kind of stuff you were working on? Were these like counterterrorism investigations, drug cases?
When I was in the DI, or like when I was like...
When you were working in FBI intelligence? Yeah,
so no, from the DI's perspective, we weren't involved in investigations. I mean, the bureau's divided up.
Okay, you were like...
we had our own,
I got you.
So we didn't work cases like that. I mean, we worked with our partner agencies. We like I said, a lot of what you do at headquarters is setting up national policies and guidance and budgets and things like that. So, but yeah, my other partner ADs and executive assistant directors that had those responsibilities, worked the criminal counterterrorism cases.
And is this about the time that they ask you to be an assistant director?
Yeah. So I get asked to come back to headquarters. I was in LA as a special agent in charge. I'm asked to come back to headquarters to be the acting deputy assistant director of the DI. So there's an assistant director that runs the Directorate of Intelligence, and then at the time there were 3 deputy assistant directors. And I'm asked, can you come back for a couple of weeks? And I remember my boss in LA saying, like, you're never coming back. I go, no, they just need me for 2 weeks. Like, turned out to be 7 years. Like he was right. I never came back, and I ended up in headquarters because they moved me into that role as deputy assistant director, and then I got promoted to be the assistant director when Director Mueller was there, and then I became the executive assistant director when Director Comey was there.
Do you want to tell the story about Director Mueller when you almost got yourself fired?
Right. So. I worked for all 3 directors, and they all had their different styles, and I enjoyed working for all 3 of them. Director Mueller, he was, I loved his style because, like, you knew if you messed up, you knew you messed up. Like you just knew it, and I liked his former Marine style, and he was intimidating. I will say that. Every morning we would brief him every morning, and before we brief him, we'd have like 4 pre-briefs. So they start like 5:50 in the morning. They're briefing me, then we go to the next person. We kind of go up the chain until we end up in Director Mueller's conference room for the morning briefs. And you have to be prepared. So like the one thing you don't want to do, don't try to bullshit him. If you're not prepared, he's going to know it. So you prepare yourself, and that's important, right? So every morning I got prepared, and we get there super. So one thing you also knew is like, don't be late. So you can imagine right before his brief, we're lined up, ready to go. All the people that are going to be in the brief. There's all the different assistant directors. We're lined up in the hallway, and they're waiting for his secretary to say, you can come in now. Then we'd all pile into the conference room, and then his office is in the back, and then he comes in at the time, and he sits at the main chair, and the brief goes on, the brief starts on, and you got to know, because he asks he's detailed questions, and so every time you survive one of those things, you're like, okay, So I had live another day and made it through that brief. But I remember one time I was supposed to brief him on something that was not a morning brief, and it was a brief that I was working a special project. It was called the Director's one of his priority initiatives, and I was the briefer. Okay, and so Director Mueller would sit in the main chair. There'd be a conference room. Over here to the side, here to his right is the deputy director, and then right here to the left is that first chair. That's where the briefer sits. Okay, and that was my chair. And then around the table there are all the other executives. And so the meeting was supposed to be at 10 o'clock in the morning. I'm gonna make up some of these times just because I don't remember exactly the times, but it was 10 o'clock in the morning, let's say. And I remember getting there at 9:45. Now, I had prepared this. I probably didn't sleep. I mean, I was just focused because I'm going to brief Director Mueller. And so I get to the secretary, and I just want to let her know that I'm 15 minutes early, but I'll be out here in case she needs me. And before I can even open my mouth to say like I'm early, she's like, "Where have you been?" And I go, "I was in my office. I'm here early." She goes, "This meeting started at 9:30, so it's 15 minutes already into it." And she had sent an email to my secretary to tell me about the time change, which obviously I didn't even know. And so I see the door, and I go like, "Oh my God," because I have to open the door, and I know there's gonna be a conference room table, there's gonna be a bunch of executives, and there's gonna be Director Mueller looking right at me. And I almost didn't want to go in. But I figured at this point I'm fired, okay, my career's over. So I just opened the door, and it was like, in those movies where like the jukebox stops and everybody just like looks. And here I come walking what seems to be like a mile to get to my little chair right in the front there. And it's interesting because around the room, there's almost like this sense of, oh, this is gonna be good.
Eric's in trouble.
This is gonna be good. He's gonna get filleted right here. And so I get up to the front chair. There's, this case, here I am. Director Mueller's right here. And as I'm kind of starting to pass out papers, which is, like I said, the guy that was sitting on my side, he knew about the project. He already kicked it off. So they already started. He was winging it. So as I'm doing this, Director Mueller says something to me, but I can't hear him. I don't hear him. I'm at this point I'm thinking like, what's going to happen to me? And so at the time, the general counsel, she says, "I don't think he heard you." And then he said, "Did you hear what I said?" And I said, "No, sir, I didn't hear you." And he says, "I said, you're going to like Anchorage this time of the year." And I said, "You do know I'm Puerto Rican, right?" And and I would have never said something like that to him. But at this point, I'm fired, right? And I wasn't being disrespectful. It was just what came out. And he started laughing, like a belly laugh. Like he thought that was just so funny. And it kind of calmed me down, and I was able to get through my brief. Actually, the best brief I ever done, because I didn't think I had a job after that. I figured, whatever, I'm going back to work cases, and nailed the brief. And then as I was getting up, he says, "Hey, just want to let you know it's okay. Stuff like that happens, And he just made me feel real good about it. And I just I admired that about him. That he was tough. He had to be tough.
Yeah.
But he also, he was a good guy too, But that was the scariest time. That was the scariest thing that ever happened to me. But I don't even know if he remembers that, but I remember it.
Before we're moving on, any other interesting things about your time as the assistant director, the first time that you want to mention?
Not really. I mean, like I said, it was a time of change. And I take a lot of pride in kind of being able to be part of that, try to make sure that we do everything to keep our country safe. But no, I mean, I enjoyed the people I had around me, great people. It was a good time.
And after that, you left the Bureau.
Yeah.
And took a job doing security for Disney.
Yes, the Walt Disney Company. Yeah. That was 2016. When you're an agent, any 1811 kind of was the designation. Like you can retire at 50, and then we were mandatory retire at 57, and so anywhere between that time, people are usually leaving. And so I was just about to turn 50, and this is 2016, and I'd gotten the job at Disney as head of security for their parks and resorts segment. So I left the bureau on a Friday, and I started in Burbank on a Monday. So I went right into that, you know. I had a huge span of control. So basically anything that was a theme park, a ship, a store, or a hotel resort around the world fell under my role as the vice president for that segment. And it was, I tell you, man, that's a hard job, because Disney is, one, they have an incredible security program, you know, because security is foremost, you know, keeping all the guests and cast members safe. But there's like a saying, like the sun never sets on a Disney park, because like I would fall asleep, if you call it that, and then I'd wake up in the morning and I'd just dread looking at my phone, because while I was sleeping, Paris was up and running, you know. Orlando and Disneyland and Anaheim, they're asleep, but Paris is up, and I look at my phone and it was like almost every day it's one of these things, because the Disney brand attracts a lot of attention from the media.
Sure.
So, you know, I was almost like, I'm the vice president of de-escalation. Like I have to like, okay, try to keep things.
Crisis management.
Yeah. Because like, for example, in Paris, there's a train station in Chessy that actually, it's a public train station, that when you come out of the train station, there's I don't know, it's like maybe half a football field from the train station to the gates of the Disney, you know, where you come in. And so people will be coming, they have suitcases with them because they're traveling maybe through up to Germany or something on this train. And then they can't bring their suitcases in, so they'll hide it, you know, behind a tree or something like that. And so now you have a suspicious package there. You got to run the dogs, and then if the media picked up on it, it'll be the big story, you know, Disneyland Paris shut down for possible this. And it was these little things like this that could turn into like, and so now you're on calls and you've got executives in different parks and you're trying to, and I did that for almost 4 years, and it takes a toll. I mean, if you think about it, we were dealing with Super Bowl level of attendance crowds every day in 6 of these parks around the world. Like,
so
every
crazy.
day. Screening, I think there was like 150 million people we'd screen a year coming in through bag check and everything. And so you could just imagine what it's like, just because. And so I could only do that for so long. I did it for almost 4 years, and then I just felt like it was time for me.
Were there any like big active threats that had to be mitigated during that time frame?
Nothing like you would you would think of that sense, but like Disney, it's iconic and it attracted a lot of attention. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't uncommon that you would see somebody, that would say something or write something and mention Disney. You know, and then we would take that extremely seriously. Like, what is it all about? So we work with our partners to understand what that threat was. But most of the times it was just the brand that attracted a lot of attention.
Right, and I imagine, you know, security encompasses a lot of things, not just terrorism, but like husband beats up his wife in the hotel or something, you know, something like that. Everything from just the crowd control, like when we opened a park in Shanghai, for example, you would had guests who didn't understand, like, for example, like you get off a ride, Pirates of the Caribbean, for example, the ride's over. What do? Everybody knows. You get up, you walk over here on this side, and you exit, and the next row comes in, But like sometimes they wouldn't get up because they want to do it again. It's like, well, you can do it again. Little things like this, and that would cause scuffles, cultural differences,
cultural things between them and the cast members, and then little things like that. But there could be. Just think of, they're like mini cities that are going on, and like I was like chief of police of.
It's so funny you mentioned that, because like I'm having flashbacks to when I went to. It was a theme park. I probably shouldn't even tell this story, but I just bring it up. My at a theme park with my daughter and my ex-mother-in-law, who is not American, and she did exactly that on the ride.
Oh, really?
We're gonna ride it again.
Yeah.
It caused a big scene.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, in the U.S., you're trained, you just get up, and you're opening these parks in different parts of the world, and they're new to it, but for the time it all, it all takes, it all starts to click.
Right.
But, there's different things, counterfeiting of products, for things like that. It just runs the gamut of what you can imagine.
Were there any notable differences from you going from being federal law enforcement to now private sector? I mean, you're not a cop anymore. You don't have arrest authorities.
No.
But I imagine you have a huge budget.
Yeah. Well, interesting because it's like when I left Disney, I started a podcast of my own called The Humble Servant. I don't do it anymore, but it was meant to help
Can people
public
find it?
servants.
Can people find it out there if they look for it?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I
Okay.
mean, I think I did like 10 episodes maybe, and then it was like, I think my wife at the time said, you need to do something to make some money, like, because I started a
This
company.
podcasting racket.
Look, I didn't have as many followers as you had, and I wasn't making any money. I was just kind of like, it was cool because I got to, I'd started my own company at the same time, but my company started in March of 2020, right in the middle of COVID, so like nothing was happening. So I started this podcast, and it was designed to help public servants, military, firefighters, law enforcement, whatever, transition from private government into private sector roles, and like some of the complexities with that, like even how they write their resumes and things they talk about, how they talk about, and stuff like that, and it's, when you're in public service, let's say you're a police officer, I mean, you have a lot of skills that you're learning that are so transferable, so valuable to the private sector. I mean, think about your ability to connect with others, to de-escalate things, to solve problems quickly, think on your toes,
All your
manage
experience with
budgets,
JTTF,
everything. I mean, all that you can transfer it, but sometimes the way we describe what we do doesn't resonate sometimes with like somebody on HR. Right. So I was helping them kind of do a little, help them with that. Probably the biggest thing that you realize is that when I was in the FBI, we were kind of like, the whole organization was about national security, and we were the focus of what we were doing. When you go into the private sector, these companies are, it's shareholder value, it's they're generating revenue, they're a company, and security isn't the primary mission of the Walt Disney Company. It's an important aspect of it, but it isn't what drives it. It's like, so you have to be able to integrate with the operational side and the revenue side to make sure that you're incorporating the security to an extent where you could still be a viable business, and you kind of keep manage that. But I went from being the guy in the room who knew the most about something because I was in an environment where I was very comfortable with the intel and whatever I was doing, to being the guy in the room who knew the least about what they're talking about. Like the whole Disney culture and the way that they spoke and everything like that, I had to learn all of that. And that transition is hard. But I will say this, because there is this thing where a lot of corporations that are hiring corporate chief security officers, they don't want somebody right out of government. They want you to actually have time in the private sector, and then they'll hire you. So it's kind of in a tough situation, because how am I going to get that experience? You're not hiring me, right? And so I remember somebody once, I went through my gauntlet of interviews, because when you go through these jobs, you're interviewed by everybody, like the OGC to the head of finance. And one of them asked me, like, do you worry about if your ability to transition from government into the private sector? He asked me that question. And I go, actually, and he said, to Disney. And I said, actually, I would probably be more worried the other way around. Like, I'm more of the kind of Disney kind of, like, I am okay with, like, working in environments where, you have a lot of different team members, and, the culture may be different, the way they speak. I have no issue transitioning here. I think I'm wired to fit really well in this company. It'd be the other way. If you ask me that might be where the challenge would come from. But it is a challenge. I mean, you just, everything's different. The way I brief is different. Like when you briefed Mueller, like, you get to the point. Here it is. It's a very regimented. Boom, 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 boom. You're hitting everything. Some of these ones called like a military brief. I remember doing I'll tell you a Disney story because it's actually in one of my podcasts and it kind of got a lot of attention. At the time I was working for Bob Chapek, who was my boss, and then Ron Iden, who also was the chief security officer, and I was going to brief Bob Iger on something, and it was an operation security plan for something at Walt Disney World that we put together, and we were going to brief Bob Iger. And it's kind of cool. You get to brief Bob Iger. He's not a hard person to brief. He's a very, very nice guy. But I studied for my brief just like I would with Mueller. It's like or any of them, Comey or Director Ray. You just want to be prepared. And so when I finished I remember sitting in front of Bob Iger's in front of me. Bob Chapek is right to his left, and Chapek's like looking at me like a lot, and I'm looking at Iger, and Chapek's like he's just got his eyes locked on me. And I after the brief's over, I think I nailed it. Like I walked around going like, I think my wife asked me like, how'd it go? I said, I nailed it. It's the best brief I ever gave. Only to find out that Bob Chapek, he wanted to talk to me to give me some feedback on it. And I said, oh, this is gonna be fantastic. He's gonna tell me how great I did. And oh, it's so great that you learned how to brief. No. He said, for content, you get an A. For delivery, you get a C. And he goes, you get a C because I appreciate that he took the time. He took like 45 minutes to kind of give me this feedback. He says, we're an entertainment company. We're storytellers, Your brief was very rigid, It's like, it was very, you need to kind of form it in a way. Tell the story. And he and to me it was almost like, what? You want me to get in there and start like telling a story, it's
like Cinderella, or
like in other words, he's like, relax. He said the way you dress needs to kind of tone down. Like I was dressed like a government person, I came in very formal, because I had been trained that that's how you look.
Culture.
But no, it's like. So I ended up buying like new clothes. I kind of got a little bit more Disney-esque the way I looked and I appered and the way, because he was giving me good
like
feedback.
Pink pinstripes? What's the Disney
It's
look?
just like more
Disney
like,
look?
it's like that more modern executive, no tie, you kind of have a nice sleek look. I don't know what it is, but it's definitely not the way you dress when you're walking into, the director's conference room. It was great feedback, but it was things like that, where I'm glad he told me, and I was able to transition and change. And the next time I had a briefing, I didn't get up there and start tap dancing, but at least I was much more relaxed,
And it makes sense. You got to tailor it to the audience.
Exactly.
And this audience is Disney.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's an example of kind of some of the transitions, difficulties. Or
That's a great story.
Yeah.
But you said that this job did take a toll on you, and it was high stress.
Oh yeah. Very high stress. High stress, I didn't have no problem in stress. Like, I love 2-minute drill work. I love that. Stressful environments kind of get me energized. But when you know your stuff, you know what you're doing because you have years and years of experience versus like you're brand new and everything coming out of your mouth is wrong. Like I would say something and people are like, what? Okay, I'm not supposed to say that. Or I would do something, but like, what? No, I'm not supposed to do that. And now you're leading a huge stressful environment. Everybody's focused on you. And you just don't, it takes years to learn this kind of stuff, But yeah, I actually like being busy. I like that kind of stuff.
And so was it kind of a relief when they asked you to come back to the Bureau?
Yeah, so I don't know if relief's the word, because remember, by this time, I've left Disney, I've started my company, which nothing's happening, it's COVID, and I got my podcast going. I really missed the mission part. Like, I'm a mission person. I come from generations of law enforcement. My father was a cop, his father was a cop, and then we have like 4 generations of police of Puerto Rico throughout my entire family, and serving my country and being part of the FBI and the greater community of public service, that was everything for me. No matter how cool Disney was, but the cool thing with Disney was I felt like I was a public servant too, because I was keeping families safe.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? I'm keeping people safe. But I longed for the fellowship that comes with being part of something like the FBI. And when I got that call, man, like in 3 seconds, yep, I'll go back in a heartbeat. And I got to experience what most people probably don't get to experience, like to go back, into an organization, and to be able to continue that mission, that work was like, I can't even tell you how happy I was. In fact, I probably would still be there if it wasn't for the fact that I left to start my new company, which is a tech startup company, to help solve like a challenge in technology with public partnerships.
Tell us about your second stint at FBI. Then, what was this job that they asked you to do?
So it was to become the assistant director, what's called the Office of Private Sector. It's a smaller strategic arm of the bureau that really its focus is to build relationships and partnerships with our private sector partners that are all kind of facing the same challenges we are. Now with the way threats have changed, cyber being a huge focus.
Is that a lot of involve also like corporate counterintelligence, like things that involve national security?
Not necessarily. I mean, it could not necessarily. For example, there's these two huge national programs at the Bureau, the Domestic Security Alliance Council, DSAC, and these are chief security officers from different companies. And these folks, they have to make security decisions every day to keep their company safe, and they rely on any information, threat information that we can provide to them, And so we are providing information to them so that allows them to be able to execute their mission to keep their company safe. But now, I mean, there's a number out there that's been thrown around that 85% of our critical infrastructure is owned by the private sector. Okay, so the front lines have kind of shifted, and there is a huge need for us to integrate, again, through legal means, like we're building relationships and we're sharing information that we can share with them, but we have to go from, I always call it, like right now we're partners. Mm-hmm. We got to be teammates, because the folks that are on the front lines now that are in these companies, without the information of like, hey, this is a potential risk and a potential threat, our entire critical infrastructure is at risk. And I look at like what happened at 9/11, with 9/11 after the commission studies came out, and people started to look at the failures that occurred. Information sharing between the federal government and the state and local partners was obvious. Like, how are the police officers supposed to do their job if at the national level we have information that they need? Right. And so you saw this entire movement to bring the police departments and state local parts better integrated with the federal side so that we have better information sharing. There's work to be done, but it's a big improvement than it was back, with 9/11. I am convinced that we're kind of heading down a path that some major cyber attack could occur, in which when you start to analyze what happened, if there's information that person, that CISO or that chief security officer could have had, that could have done something to kind of help protect it, we didn't get it to them. We're going to be figuring out why. It's going to be things like technology. There was an old policy in place. It couldn't do itself. And we could either wait till that happens, and then we could do something about it now. And that's kind of what my mission is now, is to do something about it. And technology is a huge challenge, like how we share this information. And that's kind of what I'm building my company to help do.
That's really interesting, like from a public safety standpoint, but also, I mean, a lot of the conversations we've been having the last couple of years in regards to China, where it's like, how do we do a public-private partnership to protect our information, as you point out, protect our infrastructure? That's going to be a critical issue in the coming years, isn't it?
It is, and there are great public-private partnership programs in place, and you can put them, the OSAC, which is the overseas version of DSAC that State Department runs. DHS has an analytic exchange program that they do. There's FBI is doing a lot in this space. Police departments, the NYPD, their SHIELD program, they're doing a lot in that thing. Again, the whole concept of moving from partners to teammates. Right. If you're a teammate, then you need to know, you got to be on the same playbook. You got to understand, and that's where I think where we have room to improve is in that area.
I'm kind of interested in, like, when we one of the holdups, potentially here, I mean, if it's a pending imminent terror attack, obviously there's responsibility to inform people about that.
Yeah.
But then what do you do when there's other cases where it's classified information or government proprietary information?
Yeah.
How do you share that responsibly with
Yeah,
the
well,
private sector?
the duty to warn, that's always going to be, if you have information that can help save lives or can help protect, you're going to get that information to them. There are means to declassify information and to get it to a point in which you can protect, and sources and methods and things like that have caused it to be classified that, and get to something that where you can actually get that information.
Right.
When I was there was never a time in which there was a potential risk or threat to somebody that we would sit on that. It's like, nope, we're going to get it to them. We're going to follow whatever rules that we have to follow, but you're going to get that information to them. And so there are ways of doing that, so that's never going to be something that's going to stop us from making sure people are safe.
And how long did you do this job before you retired a second time?
My second retirement, so 2 years.
Okay.
So, and like I said, I would have stayed another year, 2, 3, I'd still be there. I mean, I loved it that much. I had the most amazing team of folks. And, like the Bureau, like any of these organizations, is very generational. Like in my generation, I'll be 58 next month. So when I retired in 16, everybody that I worked with is retired, and then new leadership has kind of come into place. But there are people who worked for me, maybe a couple different levels, maybe in my organization, who are now leading the organization. So I was able to come back, and I was able to meet all the new people. I used to know every special agent in charge by first name across all 56 field offices. Like, boom, Bob, Michelle, whoever it was, pick up the phone, talk. And then as I left, every year I would know like 90% of them. Then I would know 80% of them. By the time I was out 6 years between this time I left, the first time this day, 6 years had passed by, and I probably knew like a handful of them. And everybody else was new. So when I came back as assistant director, now I get to meet all of them. And I will say this. I mean, the Bureau, takes a lot of heat. You see it in the media. And there's times in which it's deserved. I mean, sometimes our strongest asset is that we're humans, and because we're humans and we're regular people, we can do our job more effectively. But sometimes the weakest link is that we're humans,
right?
And we make mistakes and things happen. But I can tell you, like, the people that I work with, the folks in the FBI, I mean, especially around 9/11, Super Bowls, weddings, anniversaries, kids, none of that. You missed all those things because everybody was focused on keeping people safe. Anytime you saw an event, everybody's laughing and joking, and everybody's having a good time. There are hundreds and thousands of people that are working nonstop to make sure that you can do that. And that's the people that's the Bureau I saw. So when I was like, you get to come back, of course I'm coming back, It's like, why wouldn't I? But they're just the most amazing people, and then to being part of a community of public service is like, that's the best thing ever,
Yeah, it sounds like you really enjoyed the camaraderie and the culture.
Love it, love that, and I missed it. I really did miss it, and so. Hey, they asked me to come back and do it 3 times. I'll do it again.
Tell us about what you're doing now. You're fully into the private sector now, have a couple different business endeavors and companies that you're running. Tell us about those.
Yeah, I really have one company. The first one I started back in 2020 that I think made about $5. I don't know how much money I made. That's no longer. Now I have a tech startup company called IntelSec. The biggest challenge that we had, like I mentioned, was kind of our inability to kind of share information with our partners in a trusted environment. Like we know who you are, and so we built a collaboration platform we call SectorNet. We actually launch it next week. So it's super, exciting. It's scary because I don't have a job, so I'll be couch surfing if this thing doesn't work, but I'm convinced that it really is going to help solve a problem that we have in government right now in this area of public-private partnerships. And so that's kind of the big, like I said, I feel like I was uniquely positioned because I spent time on the corporate security side and I saw what its life was like there. And I've spent time on the government side that I've lived both of those worlds, and I've led teams to understand like what it is that's keeping us from getting to that level of maturity that we have to get to. And that's kind of my mission.
Can you talk at all about what that challenge is that you're trying to solve there?
Yeah. So for example, there's information like that the government provides to its private sector partners, and like little advisories that they'll say, like, here's some malware that you need to be familiar with. So CISA and organizations are providing this to folks. The Bureau is providing information to corporate security programs about threats, the threats of different things that are emerging and so on. And this work is actually happening. The challenge is that the way that the information is being provided to them, because we're on separate technology platforms. The government has its platforms, the private sector has platforms, and the two of them aren't connected. A lot of times we get sloppy in how we do it. So we may take something and just put a huge distro list on it and send it out. Well, you don't even know if the person who had it is the same person anymore.
Right.
And so there's a lot of vulnerabilities, and then each of the different agencies that are doing this kind of create their own way of doing it. Like, we created a portal, and you got to log in to this portal and read it. But then if you want this here, you created another portal, and an agency created another portal. So here you are in the private sector with 15 different passwords and logins.
You have to check each of these things every day.
It's not standardized, and so I started thinking, like, how can we make it so that we could all coexist on one platform, and that we could then share and know, so we call it collaborate with confidence, because we use authentication protocols to make sure when you're coming in, you are who you say you are. And then when you're in that environment, you can talk and you can share information at a controlled and classified level. So it's not secret, top secret information we're talking about. This is information that's already being shared.
Stuff that's been cleared to share.
Yes, cleared to share, and we're just centralizing and making it super easy for everybody to be able to access that information. And it's so desperately needed. And I'm so excited about getting that out there. And creating kind of just a better way of keeping our country safe.
And you were telling me earlier that the website for it's launching next week.
Yeah.
If you want to tease it out there for people to go and check out when it comes out.
We're going to be on the Azure Government Cloud side of it. So it's sectornet.us is going to be the way you log in to our website, and then to become a member of SectorNet which are these different agencies that are, whether you're a police department, government agencies, or a private sector person, then there's ways that you could request to become a member of SectorNet and to be part of that community. Cool. So that'll be a big deal for us. It's like a traditional tech startup. It's a small group of people, handpicked that have worked tirelessly to get this done. But super excited.
That's awesome. We covered a lot here, but is there anything that I missed? Any big career highlights or any things about transitioning out of federal service? Anything that you'd like to talk about that I didn't ask?
Yeah, no, I think we covered a lot. It's been a lot of fun. I do want to kind of put a plug in for, there's a group called the Green Beret Project. And these are a lot of folks in the soft community that are coming together and helping kind of inner city kids around kind of the Dover, Baltimore area.
Wow.
These folks, it's a small team of people, and hopefully I can put a link on this
we'll put one in there.
to actually get people to see the work that they're doing. Because one of the cool things about the Green Beret Project is, like, they won't just find kids that need help. Kind of they're in environments now. They're maybe their parents are in prison. They're covered, surrounded by crime, and here these men and women come and they help these kids. But they don't just like, hey, come over here, we're going to have this barbecue, and they stay with them. And they stay with them throughout the journey of not only just helping them get through this adversity that they're experiencing in their communities, but get them jobs. And they're putting these kids into, companies and work. There's one kid who's applied to be an FBI agent. It's like unbelievable. And they're doing it just, with limited funding. They're doing it with limited, resources.
That's pretty cool. I've never heard of it before.
And like I said, it's perfect for, your audience, which, these folks who, they take them they do cool things. We went on hiking trips, on whitewater rafting, just giving them a sense of kind of like sometimes filling that gap of you're not alone and we're here to help you.
Yeah.
And it's just an amazing thing that happens. And I just wanted to put a plug in for that.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
And I know it isn't the intent of the project, but like I really believe that, special operations, I'll go ahead and put a finger on that. I wish they did a little bit of better job reaching out to some of the inner city kids and telling them about some of these opportunities that exist in the military.
I tell you, man, who doesn't look up to somebody in special forces and look up with like, I want to be like you, or, if you say it, like, I believe it, and it's like, that's perfect leadership right there. It's like, I just know like when these kids are around these guys, they're motivated to want to do better and to be better, and so we just need to be doing more of it. That's
really cool.
Yeah.
Do we have questions for Eric?
We have a couple. From M. Corbin. Thanks for your work. Commitment versus compliance is a very nuanced take. Care to split the hairs on the militarization of various narcotics organizations and the interplay on spheres of influence on spheres of influence that have on them?
I think I heard two. Was there two questions? The one about commitment versus compliance? Is that?
Yeah, and to split the hairs on the militarization of various narcotics organizations.
Okay, so on the commitment versus compliance thing, I mean, you can, I didn't make this up. I mean, if you Googled commitment versus compliance leadership style, it's basically that. It's putting the work up front. And creating an environment in which you explain to the folks on your team why this is important, why we're doing what we're doing, in anything. I mean, I think you should lead that way anyway. A lot of times, one of the simple ways of doing something like that is if you have a team and you're going to set your goals and objectives and your strategy. A lot of times, the manager sits there and comes up with it. Bring your team together. Let's all collectively determine what we're going to do, so that now there's buy-in. And there's commitment, because we've all come together to say this, versus compliance where the leader will do it and say, here's our 10 things we're going to do this year, do it or else. That's the more compliance kind of side.
For that to be effective, I mean, I agree with you. For that to be effective, I just point out the boss selling it, he has to believe it himself.
Oh, of course.
And like I can tell that you're very passionate about these subjects. Like, these things matter to you. And that sort of passion is like infectious too in the organization.
It is. Like, and you can't BS your team either.
Yeah.
Like, especially
they're
in the
gonna,
FBI.
They're gonna know.
Like you're surrounded by FBI agents. Like, and you think you're gonna pull one over on them? Like, if they'll sniff it out. If they think that you're doing this for the wrong reasons, or you're doing it for some, or you don't even believe in it, you're not gonna pull it. So you have to be 100% dedicated to the mission yourself and believe it, or else, it falls. As far as about the militarization of these drug organizations, I don't know how much I could even provide of any value on that. I mean, you can, these organizations, they are going to build arsenals and to try to keep up any way they possibly can, and they got the money to do it. But you might want to get one of your guests that actually knows a little bit more about that. It wasn't as big of a thing when I was working drugs back then. It is now. Back when I was there was a little different environment. So,
we have one from Isaac. In your professional opinion, should private companies like Disney, etc., start doing hackback as part of their cybersecurity practices?
I don't know if I know what a hackback is.
Is that like offensive hacking?
I can't help either. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Yeah.
We have one more.
Yeah. No.
MMC1, they offered me a job as chief electrician at Disney. I told them I won't work for no Mickey Mouse outfit. Thanks, MMC.
Yeah. Hey,
you worked for the mouse.
I worked for the mouse. I had a good time.
Worked out pretty well.
Yeah, I had a good time.
Eric, I mean, thanks a lot for coming in and doing this interview,
awesome.
man.
Yeah.
I'm glad. I hope you enjoyed yourself.
No, I remember when you reached out to me. You're like, of course I'll do this. So.
It's always sometimes there's some people I reach out to who are like friends of friends. It's a little easy, but like I kind of shot you a message on LinkedIn, like a shot in the dark. Like, hey, man.
Yeah, and I said, of course. I mean, once I realized, who your main audience is. I go, of course, them, and I just like love to be involved any way I can.
Yeah, thank you. Anything else that you want to tell people? Anything else you want to plug before we roll out?
No, I think that's it.
Okay.
You know, yeah.
Next Friday, we're going to have a State Department Foreign Service officer on, a guy who had a lot of experience in Afghanistan, experience with the bombings in Kenya and Tanzania, some other hot spots around the world. Actually, our first Foreign Service officer, I think, that we've had on the show. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And then we'll be back on, is it Monday, D? The 8th? Yeah. We'll be back on Monday with Adam Gamal. He is the guy who authored the book, The Unit, about an Army Special Mission Unit. I'll let Adam describe all of that. Yeah, he'll be here in studio. We're going to have a black box over his face because we can't reveal his identity, all this good stuff. But it's going to be a really fun interview. So please join us on Friday and Monday. Eric, again, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And we'll see all of you guys on Friday and then Monday. Take care out there. Have a good night.